In less than 2 months, world leaders and business executives will be gathering in Davos, Switzerland for the World Economic Forum's annual meeting 2015. In the lead up to this international event, the forum released its outlook on the global agenda for 2015. Now, this in-depth report highlights the trends within as well as the challenges that countries and regions currently face around the world. On today's show, we'll be unpacking the regional challenges and trends in Southern Africa with a strong focus on education and skills development. This is the second in a series of 3 regional debates, with the first being held in Nairobi last week and the third to be held in Nigeria in December. Joining me in studio to share their insights for the Southern African region are Dr. Sipho Moyo, Executive Director for Africa at One, Mamadou Toure, founder and chairman of Africa 2.0, the foundation, and Rapelang Rabana, founder Rekindle Learning. And joining us from our bureau in Cape Town, Dr. Iqbal, Surve, the chairman of Sekunjalo Investment Holdings and Independent Media South Africa. Thank you all for joining us. Rapelang, you've just come back from Dubai, where obviously the event was held on the Global Agenda Outlook and a key focus on these regional challenges. Did you have a chance to drill down into the Southern African region and the fact that education skills challenges are at the top of the agenda?
For sure. I think it's not an issue that one has to drill down to. It's quite top level. And I think 2 sort of major issues came out from that discussion for me. The first was that there's a deep lack of transparency between public institutions and tertiary institutions, business and government, that need to actually talk together to actually identify the gaps and the skills that need to be developed that will get employed and that will grow the economy. Right now, young people don't necessarily know what they need to study. Tertiary institutions are not necessarily aligned with the curriculum that businesses will actually support and employ from. So that transparency was a big issue. And then the second was really how we use technology and mobile phones to be able to provide greater access and improve the learning efficiencies to be able to upskill people in corporate sector as well as in schooling environments. And that's another big opportunity to address this area.
Mamadou, how do we move from the talk shop to the execution and to tangible solutions around education and skills development?
It's quite interesting indeed, as I was part of the Global Agenda Council on civil participation, and skills was also a very critical topic. And we just come out now from the Africa 2.0 symposium, where execution was the anchor modus operandi. What I believe is involve more the private sector and actually the younger generation into designing the learning that is adapted to their needs, right? So as we promote very much of a leapfrog approach, for instance, Rapelang with a Rekindle model, or we had this young guy, Cecil, this young Ghanaian who is a dropout of school, and who decided that it's not because he's a dropout that he doesn't deserve a degree. So he designed a software that allows actually online learning and mobile apps learning, but that is also, user-generated content from a community-based learning point of view. So we've decided to adopt that model, and it's a very interesting one in terms of allowing people to actually leapfrog the development. What I believe, though, is skills is not a standalone issue, right? So we tend generally to look at, skills development as much as it is fundamental for the actual leapfrog of the continent. We need to look at it in a systemic way, right? So what we believe is that, youth population in Africa grows like this. School classes and teachers grows like that, right? So basically, the gap gets wider and wider as the years go. So the best way to leapfrog is actually to also involve telecommunications companies to make data access and 3G, etc., more affordable for schools or for learners, so that you can
I want to pause on the technology element and bring Iqbal into the discussion, because I think technology is what we're going to spend a lot of time discussing today, to be able to, as Mamadou said a moment ago, leapfrog on the education and skills development front. Iqbal, are you in agreement there?
Just to make the point, in the Agenda Council, which I'm part of, which is the Emerging Multinationals Agenda Council, we in fact identified a program to address the issue of both skills development and jobless growth. And that program was called the 10 Youth Program. And the 10 Youth program was in fact one of the programs, and the council in fact got one of the awards in Dubai. And essentially it is how to address the issue of joblessness and skills development for the youth. But the 10 stands for talent identification, the E for enablement as well as education, and the N for nurturing. And the idea is in fact to link up corporates and for them to take in a number of young people and to nurture them through a program to address the issue of both skills development and jobless growth.
Sipho, let's bring you in and talk more about this private-public sector collaboration when it comes to education and skills growth, because that's as close as we're going to get, along with technology, to creating a silver bullet in this space.
Yes, indeed. I think also we're living in a time when society expects things not just from government. You know, it's a very shared governance that we've entered into. So, you know, society expects things out of government as well as private sector, and even out of civil society, to be quite honest with you, and everyone else. So I think particularly for education and skills development, it is key that private sector plays a role there, because I'm part of the Africa Global Agenda Council, and the big issue there is about inclusive growth. And essentially, this is one of the keys to inclusive growth. When I was growing up, education was the great equalizer. Today, it's education and skills development. Perhaps it's skills development and education, you know, to even be sure. So it's very important that private sector plays a role, because it's about bridging the gap. There's a growing inequality, and this is not a secret. You know, inequality is growing all over the world, not just in the poor countries, but also in developed countries. And it's about minimizing and closing that gap, that inequality gap. And this, as you said, is the closest thing to a silver bullet, is making sure that people have access to the education. It's not just about having education. And what you'll notice, if you look across the continent, there's a number of amazing initiatives, but they're all really sort of at pilot, for lack of a better word, pilot level. But it's really about scaling that and just making that the mass education. You know, those amazing programs need to be scaled so that they're accessible to everybody. They're not just sort of a trial period at a trial level where they're producing wonderful results for 100 kids. No, that needs to be the standard and the norm for Africa.
So let's talk now about not just collaboration between private and public sector, but collaboration between countries. Because as you mentioned, Sipho, you've got all these pilots, these test phase education projects, and they're all getting individual attention in different countries. What about a collaborative effort across Africa?
I think there's been some interesting examples. So Africa 2.0 was part of, after a symposium we did on capacity building, we were invited to be part of a steering committee on regional centers of excellence led by the World Bank. And as key advocacy element that we recommended was to reinforce this cross-country collaboration. And the pilot is actually being developed now in West Africa, where the World Bank is investing 175 million for centers of excellence, but in a regional base, right? So you would have infrastructure in one specific country, banking in another one, tourism in another one. Why? Because those countries are relatively small in size and not necessarily have the critical mass of knowledge. So you want to create those regional centers where knowledge can be shared. Now, what we've seen and what we believe, though, is there's a study that has demonstrated that a human brain remembers 10% of what they read, 20% of what they hear, 30% of what they see, 40% of what they see and read, 50% of what they experience, 70% of what they teach. So today, the classroom as it is more you sit, you listen, and you go and read and you listen. So you're basically activating only 10% of your brain capabilities. And what we've seen, and that's why I refer to this e-campus new model that has been developed and pulled out in Ghana. It calls also for community, for podcast, for videos uploaded. And the same way as internet is user-generated content. And we're seeing now, we have Africa 2.0 is partnering with Brian Biggs from Rock Nation, who have been able to provide $40, $50 tablets that could be in partnership with governments where actually those kind of contents could be shared and disseminated. So it's really cross-country collaboration, but led through institutions and private individuals. And to Dr. Moyo's point, ideally is piloted in a specific place, but leave also entrepreneurs come up with the systems that the society of today actually needs. If you think of it, internet was just a web that every human being ended up filling, where you go and pull data and information.
Well, now we need to empower our entrepreneurs to be able to take these initiatives forward. Perhaps, Rapelang, you can talk to us about your experience. You're operating Rekindle. It is a learning initiative largely in South Africa and Botswana. What is your experience of operating on the ground? What support are you getting from government?
Sure. Support is still definitely quite short. I think that while people and government is generally quite excited about technology, it's more for the novelty and the lack of understanding of how you really sort of get value out of those activities is still quite limited. So what I found, especially in my interactions with education institutions, is that we're fascinated by the idea of putting a laptop in a school or a tablet in the school, but we haven't interrogated what the learning activity is going to do or be that will actually deliver the results we want. So we need to go a step beyond that, because while we can use these sort of tablets and things to provide access to information and digitize textbooks and things like that, that is really just duplicating what happened on pen and paper. And the real innovation is going to come up when we identify how we make learning more efficient. And that's about actually developing whole new processes and activities on those devices that deliver better learning outcomes. And that's using things like personalized and adaptive learning technologies that optimize depending on how the learner is performing to help them actually build mastery and reinforce the areas that they need to. Those are the technologies that are going to reinforce the rate at which people, or change the rate at which people can learn and get to a level of competence that a school or a company can value. And that's the conversation that isn't happening yet. We are still in the phase of technology is interesting and novel and it's cool, but we're not asking how has learning happened better and more efficiently than it would have happened on pen and paper. And that's the conversations that need to be happening. And until sort of governments and organizations also demand that, we'll stop at this level where we're just happy to plant devices in environments without getting to the next level of making learning more efficient and putting in the monitoring and evaluation that delivers those results.
Iqbal, at the Global Agenda Council, was that discussed, taking education initiatives beyond just placing devices in front of children, in front of scholars, and looking at what exactly they're going to be learning on those devices? Was there any solution tabled on that front?
No, definitely. In fact, it was part of the Meta Council discussion. And the sort of integration of technology and education and media, for that matter, is a very important one. Of course, the challenge that South Africa faces and many parts of Africa faces is that we still don't have sufficient bandwidth to be able to deploy such technology on a widespread basis. That's the first challenge. The second challenge is that the cost of these devices, whilst they are coming down, are still well above what the budgets of countries, governments can afford. But I think at the end of the day, it's definitely the right direction to go, and we're going to increasingly having to find how we are able to generate education content for both learners at schools, but also learners that are in their adult life. And I think MOOCs have a crucial role to play in enabling the development of skills and education on the continent.
Mamadou, you wanted to take what Rapelang was saying a little further, and I went straight to Iqbal. Would you like to clarify?
I actually want to jump on your point about how to execute, right? So, as Africa 2.0, we very much transform hope into action, and we are the ones we've been waiting for. Until we wait for cross-country cooperation, I think it's going to start from a bottom-up point of view. And to that point, what we've been doing with eCampus is to say it's been done in Ghana, and because we have a presence in 30+ countries, we are committing to scale it up. And I want to now engage Rapelang on those levels, as we are here to execute. Why don't we also take that model and leverage on the fact that we have a footprint and we have a great advocacy group here who works with leaders in Africa and around the world to actually work at government level and scale up some of those best practice by leveraging on our respective skills and strength. And let's not forget Iqbal, who is here, who is one of the great investors and runs to help us mobilize big private sector. You know, I don't want to talk too much. I want to get things done. So what about
I like your approach, and I think we've got a great council here to change the education and skills development landscape. Sipho, are you taking up the challenge?
Absolutely. Actually, the reason I was a few minutes late, I was on the Big Brother House with AU Commissioner talking to young people about advocacy in Africa and talking to their leaders.
Perfect.
So,
Iqbal, you've been asked to come forward as an investor into the council that we've just created on the desk to solve the problems that we're facing when it comes to education and skills development on the African continent. Are you in, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a huge opportunity to do good and do well. So, you know, very basically, education is a very important area, and we can leapfrog by using technology. So we can do two things. One, we can build commercially sustainable enterprises. Two is we can skill up people. And three is we can lead towards greater integration of the countries and the peoples on the continent. So, I mean, certainly on my side, you know, we've done a number of investments in this area, and we continue to do so. And I couldn't agree more with what has just been said in terms of more investment in this area.
Rapelang, taking your initiative beyond South Africa and Botswana, and perhaps kicking off in Accra as well from a Ghanaian perspective?
I definitely want to take that up. And I mean, I really get excited because I don't think education should just be shelved as a social issue. There's real commercial and economic incentives for really doing this. I'm one of those people who believe that while at the moment data usage is driven by your social media and games and things like that, within the next 10 to 15 years, I do believe that for this continent, given the huge young population of under 50% under the age of 30, a large driver of that revenue will be from learning and educational related content, because there's such a huge learning gap and skill gap to fill. And this millennial generation is going to look at learning in a totally different way than the previous generation. And if we deliver those learning applications and experiences on mobile phones that will reach a wider populace, we'll actually get to the point where young people drive that demand, and telecoms operators and every other role player in that system will also benefit. So it's not just an economic, it's just as a social thing. There's real economic benefits to this in the long run.
When it came to these challenges with regard to sub-Saharan Africa and the highlighting of education and skills development as the biggest issue or biggest challenge facing us, the majority of the respondents said that business would be hardest hit by these education and skills development challenges, followed by government. So it's in businesses' interests really to get this right. Sipho, I've got to ask you, do you think that business is coming to the party extensively enough?
You know, let me take it back a little bit. One of the key MDGs, Millennium Development Goals, was achieving education for all children in Africa. And while it's the one MDG that has almost been met from an enrollment point of view, from a quantity point of view, it is actually the worst performing from a quality point of view. You know,
quality is the issue.
Yes, quality is the issue. That's the irony of it. Last year, in preparation for post-2015, which is the new development agenda, at the One campaign, we ran a survey in Southern Africa asking citizens what their development challenges and priorities were. And what we heard from them was education, jobs, accountable government. And those three things all come together under this education and skills development. You know, it's the education, it's the jobs that come from getting that education, and it's the accountability of government, but also private sector, as we're hearing more and more. And private sector will have to come to the party, because this is an investment in its own prosperity and its own success.
You bring up a very valuable point, and this is the quality issue that I would like to just pause on for a moment. Rapelang, I don't know if you've got any thoughts around quality. I've spent a lot of time traveling around the continent and hosting different forums on education. In Nigeria, the stance was that the status of teachers is in a dismal state. In fact, the statement was those who can't teach, those who can't teach. I mean, these are the people responsible for educating the young population across Africa. So that's where I want to start with this quality issue. How do we address that? How do we upskill our teachers? Because we can't move anywhere until we get the quality issue right.
And I think this is where technology plays such a big role, because in a digital platform, you can put in those metrics. The problem now with the traditional system is that we're just so used to putting young people in a classroom, taking that they were there on a register, but with no real measurement of knowledge transfer and the knowledge asset base that's being built. And when you put that learning process that could ideally supplement a classroom environment where young people could continue learning beyond the 10% in their own time on these mobile devices, you get far more metrics as to what's happening. And that data also feeds what the teacher or the institution can then choose to target and provide further interventions on, because now you can isolate problem areas. Right now we teach into the dark. There's no data as to where people are at on an individual basis or a group basis, and we just keep going through the same process because we don't know where individual learners' status is.
We need to monitor, in other words, the outcome of the teaching.
Yes, and I think, you know, as we entering the era of big data, that's the right timing. And you know, with Africa 2.0, we're strong believers of ecosystems, in ecosystems. If you look at the Silicon Valley, if you take twins, right, one born in Africa and another, you know, somewhere in California, I mean, no, born at the same place but evolving in different areas. The one who would basically be in the Silicon Valley would have access to investors, access to data, to knowledge, to mentors, etc. And I think today, if we manage to create the same education and skills ecosystems for learners, not only those, the younger ones, but also those who are more mature, etc., to catch up with life and skills by giving them the right access to the information, and also a way for them to measure their progress, and the possibility and the knowledge and understanding that those skills will give them an opportunity in a job market, and hence also the need to have the private sector involved in terms of saying, we are willing to get the best, those who have the skills to do it. And my biggest shock actually was when I did start 2.0, I realized that for a long time I lived in a bubble by having been in Ivy Leagues environments and, you know, big companies, and I now had to recruit people.
Your bubble has burst.
And my bubble burst completely. And then I realized that there was a gap that needs to absolutely be filled if you want to deliver, you know, in such a global competitive environment. And, you know, and I came up to this quote that says, you know, if you want a year of prosperity, grow a grain. If you want 10 years of prosperity, grow a tree. If you want 100 years of prosperity, grow people. And skills is actually the key essential drivers. If you look at South Korea, that was the top priority in the growth and in the emergence. Same for Singapore. So I think Africa today is faced with a challenge, which is the youngest population in the world. You know, we're going to be probably 2 billion by 2050. 7 out of 10 youth by then in the world will be from Africa.
I think we're pretty much also sitting with the largest illiterate population in the world.
So the only way I see, you know, if we apply the models that have been done before with the little money that we have in the, you know, in the budget of governments, it's not going to work. Hence the need of at least creating that ecosystem that bring a big value, and with as a key consciousness from private sector entrepreneurs to actually grow, and the government to play its role as an enabler. And that's also very fundamental. How much do we engage that stakeholders, that particular stakeholder, to enable the
I want to bring Iqbal in on that point. Do you believe that African governments are making sufficient moves on the enabler front, as Mamadou has just alluded to, Iqbal? Are we seeing African governments enabling education, stronger education rollout and skills development?
I don't think that there's enough being done in the first instance, but I also think we must differentiate what is the role of the governments versus the role of the private sector and academic and other institutions. So I think the government must set the regulatory framework. That's the first thing. Secondly, I think it must liberalize the framework so that it allows new entrants, new entrepreneurs to be able to invest into the sector. But I think primarily it's the private sector that needs to look at the interface and investment into technology and education. I mean, as an example, someone spoke about the big data and the usage of big data for both education and media. One of my companies, Saratoga, hosted the first big data conference in South Africa called Mammoth just last week. And we had about 400 people from all over Africa looking at big data and how it could be implemented. We had some of the top speakers such as Eric Siegel from the States, Stuart Smith and others. So there's a huge amount of potential. The other point I want to make is that, often we assume that because we're taking education online, the quality of education, in fact, is less, but it's the contrary. Stanford showed recently that when their professors went and put online courses or oversaw online courses, because they were being now peer-reviewed by millions of people, they were forced to actually make sure that their courses were of a higher standard. And an interesting fact, just to demonstrate the importance of technology and education, especially for Africa, about 40% of the people that went on to the Stanford online courses came from Africa, even though north of Africa we have lots of French-speaking people. The other point is that the person that scored the highest on the aerodynamics course, which is I would guess would be an obscure course for most people, was in fact an African American woman from Chicago with 4 kids. So if that woman could score so high on the aerodynamics course, can you imagine the potential for us to uplift our continent and for people to get the necessary knowledge and develop the skills using technology? But of course, if we can get governments to buy into this, if we can get them...
Iqbal, I want to come to Sipho now, because I know Sipho spends a lot of time on the ground with African governments, and I want to get your thoughts on what we are seeing when it comes to governments creating an enabling environment for education. Is it happening?
I think the pressure is on, but we're not seeing the evidence of it happening. So what I can say, just hearing from African citizens and what they're asking of their leaders, I think the pressure is on, and I think the foundation is going to be laid. But the truth is, they're also hearing from the health advocates, they're also hearing from the agriculture advocates, they're hearing from everybody. And it's a question of resources, which is why it comes back to private sector has to be part of this game, has to be part of the, come to the party essentially. So the pressure is on, but they're dealing with so many issues, and a lot of them really quite fundamental, infrastructure, health,
And on top of that, it goes to this crisis in leadership that I think you've also spent an extensive amount of time discussing at the various forums. We're taking a short break. I know there's lots to talk about. We're coming back, and we'll have more on educational insights as they relate to the outcomes of the Outlook on the Global Agenda for 2015 straight after this. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the CNBC Africa World Economic Forum special, focusing on the regional outcomes of the Outlook on the Global Agenda for 2015. Just before we went to the break, the desk literally ignited with responses on our discussion as we went to that commercial break. Rapelang, you wanted to weigh in at this point.
Sure. I mean, Bronwyn, I started Rekindle Learning because of how I believe mobile phones can leverage whatever solutions we come up with. And looking at what's happening now when using technology, there's a lot of emphasis on tablets and laptops. And it's really based on the perception that mobile phones are not going to be good enough. And that's really based on a decision made by people who have access to multiple devices. And because an experience could be better on a tablet or laptop, they feel that mobile phones are inferior. But when we look at what's happening on the ground, we see that young people are reading more on those small mobile phones than they are on bigger screens. And that happens because they don't have a choice. And when it's the only device you have, mobile phones alone can be a huge educational tool. And yet there's too little investment going in on learning experiences on these smaller screens as opposed to traditional environments that are really better suited for the West. And that's the big opportunity there, because there's more toothbrushes on the continent than mobile phones. And that's how we reach scale, not by trying to buy tablets and laptops and plant them in schools. People will buy their own phones over time if there's a real utility to it.
Iqbal, do you think Rapelang has hit the nail on the head with the mobile phone point? Because it's the first time in an education discussion that I've actually seen that emphasis being put on the solution that a mobile phone can produce over a laptop or a tablet.
No, I agree with Rapelang. I think it makes a lot of sense. Look, 40% of all first-time users on the internet are now using the mobile phone. So increasingly people are interfacing with others. And I think it's important that we understand the future of online education or mobile education. It's not going to be done in the traditional way of a central source, sort of teaching others. It's going to be done in a community nexus. So already on mobile phones you have social media. So you're going to have education community nexuses joining in regions, in villages, in communities, and in fact, for that matter, in countries. And if we understand that the smartphone capability allows us to do that using social media platforms, then definitely the mobile phone is the future for education.
Mamadou, Iqbal there talking about communities. This touches on what is the heart of what you were driving earlier, the ecosystems that we need to create around education and skills development.
Yes, I mean, I cannot agree more. And what people don't know, to reinforce Rapelang's point, is that in the phones of today, right, the smartphones, you have a stronger processing capability than with the machines that send people to the moon. People don't realize that. And in terms of being able to in a very powerful way, share knowledge, pull data, reorganize.
I'm certainly going to look at my mobile phone in a different light now.
I can tell you, and this
can take people to the moon.
In terms of processing capability, which is quite extraordinary. And to that community point, it's essential, right? Again, no one has the captures any form of universal knowledge. You need one another either to teach you or to share their piece of knowledge, right? For a long time, Africa has been very much out of the game of knowledge on internet. But when people think of the might of Google today, is more on algorithm than on knowledge. It's actually the might of the people to upload data and knowledge on internet and then get reference on Google. And that's the power of this community of knowledge. And you can now replicate it in a very small ecosystem, in a smaller environment, in your city, in your university, at work, right? So those collabs tools where you actually pull the knowledge together. And when I mention ecosystem again is, for too long, people have looked at issues in a very isolated way. Let's think of one thing, right? People may talk about, like you say, people advocate on agriculture or advocate on. You want to put agriculture. If there's no road, the food can't go. So you also need to take into account infrastructure. Now, if you want to build roads, you need skills.
But
so you also need to
I'm
take
cognizant
into
of
account.
time, and I want to bring Sipho in here because this, absolutely, it is about this collaboration, but the coordination of the collaboration. That's what we've got to look at now, because that comes to the heart of the execution, and that takes us from these talk shops into seeing tangible results on the ground. So how do we coordinate? I mean, in South Africa, we've got the National Education Collaboration Trust, that is labor, business, government, and civil society all working together to execute the education goals within the National Development Plan. Now, that's a South African situation. Yes. How do we get that collaboration for the African continent, Sipho?
As part of the ecosystem and civil society, one of our key campaigns right now is on energy poverty. And I bring that in because it's a key part of that integration and coordination of issues. We take things in silos, but they all belong together. And one of the main reasons we're working on energy poverty is precisely for children to be able to do their homework. And now this to charge the handheld devices, if we're talking about handheld devices. So first it was just to be able to do their homework.
Energy is what makes the world go round.
And now it's about charging their handheld devices and making progress on that. So it's really important that we do have an integrated approach, coordinated and a collaborative approach, which really again comes back to all hands on deck. It just means that everybody has a stake in this, and we cannot move the needle by moving one silo at a time. So I think what my colleagues are saying here is really
Iqbal, that point, all hands on deck, but taking into account that the second biggest challenge that Africa is facing is on the governance side and appropriate governance structures. So all those hands need to be moving in the right direction and not into their own pockets. Could I put that to you, sir?
I couldn't agree more. Look, I think we must have the governance framework to be able to go forward, and that means that there needs to be if you like, a social pact, a contract between the private sector, the public sector, civil society, to really goes back to values-based leadership, towards purpose-led leadership in terms of achieving what we want to achieve. But we must have the frameworks, and we must respect those frameworks and institutions. So that is the foundation on which we build the future. So I couldn't agree more on that.
I want to start moving to 5 years from now. We know the challenges. Let's look at where the African continent, if we get this right, if we get education and skills development right, where will we be in 5 years' time, given the fact that we've got the largest youth population in the world? Maybe we can change the status quo when it comes to also having one of the largest illiterate population in the world.
I think when you look at any great and successful economy, the US in the 19th century or Asia in the late 20th century, they got there by coordinating this public sector and private sector grouping and tertiary institutions and making sure there's transparency around what's happening to ensure those results. So if we manage to achieve that, and we must have that transparency because there isn't enough communication, and if we leverage technology to multiply our efforts and really leverage the growth of mobile phones on this continent, we can get to the point where we can turn that trajectory and make that demographic dividend a great benefit for the society. Otherwise, it will become a curse, and we need to make sure that we jump over that in these 5 years to get to that point.
Mamadou, Africa 5 years from now, in your perspective?
In my view, you know, I'll go back to the key principle of this African philosophy, that is the Ubuntu, right? I am because you are. And this brings again back to this...
I am because you are.
Yes. This brings back again to this whole ecosystem approach. One cannot exist without the other. And as such, it will require some form of mindset shift, right? So, and along those lines, the mindset shift starts by believing that we can. And last week, actually, we kind of put together and launched this movement called For Africa by Africa, where we celebrate all the assets, the skills that we have, we put them in common to build a better and a more promising leapfrog continent. And I think the example of the people you've brought today are all complementary in their capability to actually drive that shift, but it starts here, right? And I guess the media also would play a major role in helping that shift. And that concept, FABA, is putting together somebody like Rapelang, who has a great idea, celebrate that idea first to have the conscience that we can, and work with somebody like Africa 2.0, who has this footprint in 30 countries, and scale it up. Because we tend to, most of the time, only the bad things get viral, like Ebola, like you name it, right? So we need to start making viral the good things. And FABA is that. And this conjunction of skills and personalities can make that happen.
Iqbal, we're both media players on the African continent. Let's just talk about that role that media can play when it comes to fast-tracking education across the African continent.
Well, I think media reflects a society, and to an extent, it can also be an accelerator for change. And I think that's really important. You know, media not just in the form of print, but also in the form of online, video content, mobile content, and that's both the opportunity for media and the opportunity for it to do quite well. But the point I also wanted to speak up on is that it's not sufficient to say Africa has young people and therefore it's going to be successful, or Africa has resources and therefore it's going to be successful. What we need to do in Africa right now is to focus on the execution capacity, and we need to make sure that we are able to educate people, because fundamentally, if you look at the success of countries such as the US or parts of Europe, and in particular China, they invested heavily in education, heavily in engineers, heavily in technology people. We need to do that, and we need to make sure that they were able to make that change. But media is going to be a really important player in all of this.
Sipho, coming to vocational training, internships, apprenticeships, isn't that another way to fast-track the gap that we're seeing from a skills perspective and creating people that are employable on the continent?
Creating people that are employable is definitely, key to all of this. And just to go back to the 5-year vision, when you asked the question, I was going to say Africa is going to be the talent pool of the world. And then I thought the last 20 years, that's what Africa has been, a brain drain. skills moving out. So what
and never coming back, so we don't get any return on investment.
So I think what Africa is going to be, hopefully, is going to begin to become the factory of the world. This is where the production will happen. This is where the value chains and the supply chains will develop and, you know, get bigger, so that we can even absorb these people, because it's wonderful to do the apprenticeships and all of these, but if we're doing them and training them to go and to go away, to leave Africa and not come back, you know, so it's really, it's what Mamadou is saying, is that it's about a mindset shift and everyone coming to the table to make this work. We have to believe that we can do it, and do it with the intent to prosper the continent, not to, you know, to prosper everyone else, but the continent.
Can we get you to weigh in on the internships, the apprenticeships, and the role that that will play in upskilling people on the continent?
Definitely. You know, one key thing, and that has been historically the problem of our educational system, highly theoretical. Very little
practical application.
Yes, practical application, and within the Africa 2.0 staff and secretariat, we've realized that knowing is one thing, know-how is better, and initiative is 10 times better. And I think this internship it needs to become more systematic and even more compulsory, right? For anybody in an educational system at higher education level or at vocational training needs in their curriculum to have that exposure to practice. I can tell you, I mean, I don't know how good of a student I was, but I really started learning when I started working. Right? And as this is essential also because it connects this bulging youth generation to the realities of society.
How do we encourage the vocational training over the university degree, et cetera, et cetera? How do we make it more attractive that people do that as their first choice?
I think it's quite simple. When we align the vocational training to economic opportunities, the equation sort of solves itself. And I think this is, again, where we can use technology really well, because sometimes it might appear overwhelming to try and do a 4-year degree through online or mobile courses and things. But if we look at doing a 4-week or 8-week program that's task-specific, that will enable you to do a specific role in a certain company that you will be employed on, that's going to change the game altogether. And this is where we can sort of align technology with vocational training to target specific skills and tasks that you need to get employed right away. And then you can keep building over time. So you don't need to study for years and years to be able to get in, but you can start little bit by little bit. And that kind of chunk or sort of bite-sized learning approach is what's going to really, really help people and be a lot more accessible to young people today. It's
one of the mobile solutions is in time learning. So yes. a vet in the field, well, a person who is tending his cows and feels that you know he needs help can get that veterinary support via his mobile phone. It's in-time learning.
Yes.
Sipho, you want to take that?
No, I was going to say I'm from Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe used to be the center of excellence for you know, for apprenticeships.
I thought it was Cameroon.
At least in the region, Cameroon, at least in this region, seriously. And people did prefer to go and do apprenticeships compared to going to university. They were the social elite. They were the people who drove the nice cars, had the big houses. So to your point, you know, if the economic incentive is right, we will get people to do the apprenticeships rather than go to university. It's about relevance, really.
She made a very important point about Zimbabwe, and we did a bit of a survey among the youth, and we spent some time in Soweto. Most kids want to be Jay-Z, Beyonce, or football player, right? But it says one important thing. It's about success.
I want to be Beyonce.
I mean, I can't be Beyonce, so...
we both want to be Beyonce.
So it's fine,
it's fine. Wants to come into the fold as well.
You know, what is interesting, what it says is that it's just about, and that's again why the role of the media becomes critical. If you create success stories within people who have gone through vocational training, who've built up their own garage, who are, you know, doing servicing on electricity, etc., and you create community success stories, and they can share their story the same way as, you know, those superstars have access to sharing their story. That's why you start changing the way people think about those professions, the inspiring aspect that it means to not necessarily have to have a PhD to be successful. And also from a curriculum point of view, what you see is that the generation of our parents would stay in one company or in one job for 30 years. This is over. Right? So what you
can have 5 careers in one lifetime.
5 careers in one lifetime.
As a starting point.
Exactly. Which means you can learn, you will be learning your lifelong. And to Rapelang's point about the 8 weeks program, this is more where we're going in terms of, it's okay, you're 20, you didn't go till the end. I mean, you would be recommended to do so. But you have many opportunities as you progress in life to learn more. And our capacity and intake capacity to actually develop new skills is limitless.
Iqbal, we're coming back to you in Cape Town, and perhaps we can get you to give us some of the final points that have come out of the Global Agenda Council, specifically now on education and skills development as action points. Because I know that Global Agenda Council is more than a talk shop. It's about action points that can be measured and monitored down the line.
Sure. So I think, first of all, just to make the point that there's a place for both online and offline education. And as we embrace the online platforms, we mustn't forget about the importance of institutions that what I suggest to do deep learning, such as university and technology-based institutions. I think as far as the council is concerned, I mean, one of the first things that we've done is to have meta councils which integrate the various councils on skills development, education, technology, governance, involvement of countries, etc. So I think what we're beginning to see is a global framework emerging, which is applicable in a local and a country and inter-country context. And I think the most exciting thing for me, particularly because I'm in the media space, is this very rapid interface between technology, education and media. And I think that probably is the greatest hope for the world to come out of its challenging period. And for most people to emerge out of poverty is if we can use technology with the right content or educational skills, we'll be able to create a very, very different world.
Rapelang, that comes back to the point you made, education using the devices but with the right content.
With the right content and the right process, and really targeting mobile phones that are consumer driven. We've seen that people who even sit in low income brackets will still get really great phones. But if we go with the approach of tablets and computers, that's aid driven. That's not scalable in the long term. And we really need to ride off the consumer demand for mobile phone technology.
Can we close the income gap? And Sipho, I'm looking at you here, because that has also been highlighted over and over again. The conversation started many years ago at the World Economic Forum on income inequality and the role that is playing potentially as a destabilizer of the global environment without being too dramatic.
Absolutely. You can't be too dramatic. It's what it is. And yes, can we? It's a matter of will. We have everything it takes to close the gap. And I think there needs to be a conscious effort, and part of that is about empowering citizens economically through education and skills, job opportunities. There's 10 million young Africans entering the job market every year. And if you don't take care of them, they are going to destabilize all of us. So you're right, we do have to close the income gap, and it can be done. The resources are there, the know-how is there, the technology is there. What we need is the political will.
Comes back to political will. Is that for you the biggest challenge, political will?
I think the threat is going to create political will. I always say leaders don't wake up with political will. There's always a social movement, a force, civil society, everyone in a threat or something that comes together and creates the political will. It doesn't come on its own.
Mamadou?
I would agree to a certain extent, and we are more a generation that is looking at wealth creation versus poverty reduction. And that's also, a whole narrative.
So that comes back to a mindset shift and looking at poverty reduction as the overriding objective.
And I've seen it in even some of the initiatives that are being done. They're about poverty. No, this generation wants to create wealth. By the moment you set your mind into the wealth creation mindset, you have done half of the way. But like Iqbal mentioned, and like we said last week at our leadership symposium, execution is key, and leadership is fundamental. Right, and in that sense, what we've tried to achieve, and that's why we pull Rapelang, we're also pulling Sipho into that, is you need a critical mass of like-minded people who have reached a certain level of consciousness of the challenge and put their skills together to actually impact sustainable change.
I really like where you're going, and I'm actually going to give you the ability now to mobilize again. As we started, you said you wanted to mobilize all these like-minded people that come from different aspects and different vocations. So you can mobilize this task team that you've created by telling Iqbal what his next point in the journey is going to be, Sipho and Rapelang. So Mamadou, I'm handing over to you to close out on this debate. So do you want to, where are you going to start?
I will actually start with Iqbal. Clearly the private sector has a fundamental role in supporting younger entrepreneurs and in also giving opportunities for internships and training. And there was one important thing, that was a minimum of their revenue should be allocated to actually training. And if they don't, then they invest in entrepreneurs who actually allow scaled training and scaled access to knowledge. That's one thing, and that's and also mobilize their peers in the private sector to provide a bigger investment into that space, because they're the first beneficiary of a well-trained workforce. Right?
Iqbal, are you clear on your action points, sir?
Absolutely, and just to affirm the point, I in fact at the Black Business Chamber conference committed 50 million towards that, and in fact asked the government to match my 50 million and asked one of the big banks to also match it, which together we can have 150 million to develop the entrepreneurs in this part of South Africa.
Great. Mamadou, to Rapelang?
To Rapelang, first, the key thing for entrepreneurs, never give up. Right? And what is critical also, what we need from you is your knowledge, your expertise to be shared at a much broader scale in terms of how you communicate, what are your key success factors. And then as an entrepreneur, you need to inspire many more other entrepreneurs in terms of sharing your stories and getting them to believe that it's possible. And what we would do as Africa 2.0 would be to use your pilot and scale it in the 30 countries where we have a presence. Because again, it's our responsibility to make the good things be known and spread.
Rapelang, your response?
I'm a great advocate of supporting indigenous innovation, and that's really where it's going to come from, because there's lots of social innovators and entrepreneurs on the continent, and I'm always speaking and supporting other young people trying to do this. If we focus on our own local indigenous solutions and not sort of expect other solutions coming in from the West, we will actually find solutions that will work in our contextual environment. So I'm in full support of that motion.
And to our Executive Director for Africa at One, Dr. Sipho Moyo. Mamadou.
Yes, as I know, every year you have a key topic that you advocate, right? Can I ask One to allocate the next 3 years, I don't know how much is going to be possible, to skills development and knowledge education in Africa? Why? Because everything you've been advocating for cannot happen if you don't have the people to do it.
Sipho?
Absolutely. I can't commit to the next 3 years because right now we're working on post-2015. That's a big thing, but Mamadou, you know, you and I can talk and we can make it happen, because I know that as an African woman, without my parents investing in education, I would not be here.
Definitely.
So that's how important it is
and
to me.
Work closely with Africa 2.0 if possible in engaging with governments. It doesn't have to be your top priority.
Absolutely.
It could be your underlining goal and ensuring that the government...
And to me, what would you like me to do as a media organization?
Spread the word and continue to do what you do best. Put people together to have that African agenda on the forefront.
You have my commitment and you have my word.
And one last thing, FABA, for Africa by Africa.
For Africa by Africa. On
Hashtag
that point,
FABA.
we've come to the end of...
things go viral.
We've come to the end of the CNBC Africa World Economic Forum special. Thank you so much to my guests, Dr. Sipho Moyo, Executive Director for Africa at One, Mamadou Toure, Founder and Chairman, Africa 2.0, Rapelang Rabana, Founder, Rekindle Learning, and from our bureau in Cape Town, Dr. Iqbal, Surve, Chairman, Sekunjalo Investment Holdings and Independent Media South Africa. Next week, we travel to Nigeria for the West African leg of this regional debate series. Until then, from myself, Bronwyn Nielsen, and the team, it's goodbye.